So it took me over a decade. Okay, hear this out. It took me over a decade to recognize that there's not one type of money, but there's three types of money. It took me a near bankruptcy. It took me almost losing my apartment. And I only figured this out after a decade of trying, not recognizing what those things were. But once I did, within a few years, I was a multimillionaire and financially free. So let's see how those three things or three types of money applied to you, how quickly it can change your financial life. All right. So we got three types of money. Did you know there's three types of money?
I didn't until you told me there were three types of money. Yeah. Before, if you would have asked me this like a week ago, I would have told you, I would have thought there were two, and I would have said debt, well, like credit, debt, and then like liquid cash. That's what I would have said.
Okay, so that's so you actually thought, so you were aware of two then?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would have thought that you were going to say debt and then just cash.
I bet a lot of people would not have thought of credit as a type of money even.
Okay.
So that's interesting. Maybe it's because you're using it strategically monthly and then paying it off each month.
Yeah.
So we can get into that. We can get into that too. But yeah, it wasn't until I recognized that there was actually three types and I needed to understand how to balance them that my financial life ever changed. Because in the beginning, when I heard money, and maybe a lot of the way people think about money is they just think about cash, like the greenback, the actual paper, right? And or debit. So let's cover cash first then. So that's the most common one. It's the most popular one that people think about. But how does cash actually benefit your life? So the way that I sum up cash is liquidity. But the biggest one that I think of is, what does cash represent? It represents control.
Yeah, for sure.
So when I think about finances and control, I don't know if there's a more important value in money than understanding control and how to control it.
Yeah, I would agree, because when you have cash, it's like the reason why people take cash and they hoard it throughout their house. Like you've seen the videos where it's like in their door frames and stuff. Yeah. People are scared to give their money away to somebody else because they want to be in control of all of it. When actually that obviously that's hindering some people, but
right.
But the idea is when you have cash and you're holding your own money and you are using your own money in the way that you want to, and you're not handing it off to somebody else to manage, you're in control.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I think cash is so important. Not from an understanding of because if you just hold on cash with no plan and no real control over it, understanding of it, it doesn't actually do anything for you. It's actually useless.
There's a lot of things that go with that, like a lot of mindset issues if you're hoarding your money and not doing anything with it. We've talked about it before in past episodes.
Yeah,
but
self-worth things.
Yes, there's a lot more going on underneath than just the fact that you want to keep your money. But
the actual action behind having cash and understanding control is that it gives you the ability to make change when and where you need to, right? So it gives you options and resources. That's why cash is so important. But that's the one that most people think of. So we don't have to spend a ton of time on that one. Okay, if there's three types of money, type one is cash. That makes sense. So you actually brought up type number two, which was credit and or debt. So you can have a line of debt essentially. So what does debt do for you though? If you think about okay, because you thought if there was two types of money, what do you think debt does then?
I think debt allows you to use money that you don't have, or that you do have. If you have the cash but you don't want to use your own money, it allows you to spend money that you don't necessarily have.
Okay.
So if you when you buy a house, if your house is $100,000 but you only have $20,000 in the bank, you can't buy a house. You can't buy it out in cash.
Right.
But debt allows you to still get the asset without putting all of your money out.
Yeah, so it gives you the ability to leverage control.
Yes. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, so when I think about money...
Should have asked you.
When I think about money, I think about control. Instead of just thinking about, dollar bills or debt or response. So when I think about debt, right, another word that I think of when I hear debt is I hear responsibility.
Yeah.
So some people are going to be better with responsibility than others. And there's also going to be an understanding that if you use debt, you're going to increase your amount of responsibility while lowering your control over time. So if you get too debt heavy, there's going to be some actions that you need to take. And one of the things that I want to talk about after we get through the three types of money is I want to talk about, if you're not balancing them well, what are the exact steps that you need to take? That way you can get them in balance. That way they can actually start benefiting your life instead of taking from you. That's the big one for me. So in debt, you're increasing responsibility. So is there an upside to debt, in your opinion?
I mean, yes, because like I said, you don't have to put forth all of your money that you have to get something, to acquire something.
So you're able to keep some of your control.
Yes, you're able to keep some of your control, or just like a safety blanket kind of.
Okay.
Like you feel safer.
Your reserves are a safety blanket?
Yes, you
Okay.
can have a safety blanket without putting forth everything that you have to purchase something. So you keep your control, like you said. That's definitely a plus.
Yeah. So I agree. So the reason that I believe debt is actually a type of money is because it's actually usable.
Yeah.
Now, it's not going to be good for everybody. You have to understand it. You have to understand yourself to know, like, am I comfortable having $1,000 that I owe, and how is it being paid for? What am I using debt for? Am I using it for fun? Am I using it for liabilities that are eventually going to take from me? Because if that's the case, you shouldn't be using debt.
Right.
Or are you placing debt onto something to A, protect it, and B, use it and leverage it for more future control? That's a different conversation in my eyes.
Well, and you talk all the time about how you have good debt and bad debt.
Yeah. All of it is responsibility. All of
it
it needs to be on a plan.
Yeah.
But there are, in my opinion, some debt that if it's feeding you or giving you the ability to enter into an opportunity which, in other words, you wouldn't have had, otherwise you wouldn't have had, I think that's a different conversation than just using a credit card to go out and buy a pair of shoes.
I would agree. I mean, we talked about it before. There's like a stigma around debt.
Yeah.
Like it's such a negative word. You hear the word debt and people are so scared of it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a bad thing.
And I believe a lot of that fear comes from a lack of understanding.
A lack of understanding, and also just a lot of people have, not even if it wasn't themselves, had bad experiences with debt. You grow up, so many of our parents have had bad experiences with debt, or you hear like family people around you, you witness it, and so it makes you scared of it and you never want to have your own debt.
So the psychological problems behind debt, especially credit card usage. So they've actually done studies between, you use your debit card and or cash and or you use a credit card.
Yeah.
Right. And they've done actual studies behind this. And the problem with using credit in creating debt is that you don't get the trigger of using your own money. You don't have that pain. You don't have that loss of I worked for this thing and now it's leaving me. Okay. So the problem is not only that it takes the brakes off, or takes the foot off the brake on the pain, but the really big problem with it is that since it doesn't create that pain of you losing your own money, it actually puts your other foot on the accelerator of spending.
Yeah.
So not only will you save less, you'll actually spend more. So those two in combination obviously become a large problem for a lot of people. And that's why I didn't use credit cards for a decade.
I just talked him into using credit cards literally 2 weeks ago. I was like, Todd, it's time to grow up. No, I'm kidding. It's time to be a big boy and use a credit card. But that's why you say, like, when you turn 18, there's no reason why you need to get a credit card right now.
No.
Like, so many people are like, you need to start building your credit the second you can.
Yeah.
It's not true.
You really don't need to. You need to get in control of who you are, learn who you are.
Learn about money and what it is and how to use it and how to leverage it before you're handed a credit card and just told, hey, this is just how you get free money, and then you just pay it off.
Yeah, well, that's why I think I explained them as I look at credit cards as gift cards. I'm not using my own money, so like a credit card feels like a gift card to me. That's how I always got myself in trouble, a decade ago.
It's funny that you say this, and you're like, you take your foot off this thing you were talking about. I feel that way about cash.
Really?
So if not money in my bank account, the number in my bank account is not like that.
Oh, if
you
it's actual
hand me cold hard cash,
it's spent.
It is. I hold on to it, and when I spend it, it's like it didn't even exist. Cash doesn't exist to me. It's not real. So if I have cash, it's like I'm spending somebody else's money. It's not real because it was never in the number of my bank account. That's called girl math. You've probably seen it, but it's a real phenomenon that happens. I'm not kidding. I experienced that.
Is that because you're so used to using cards?
Yes,
and like
because I grew up
amount?
using cards. Like my whole life, that's all I've used is cards. I didn't have cash ever.
That's really... Yeah.
So if I'm spending cash and it's not coming out of the number of my bank account, because that's what really counts for me.
Yeah.
It's like if somebody pays for a shoot for me in $300 cash and I'm too lazy to take it to the bank and that $300 sits for a week, I forget it exists. So when I used it, it's like it never existed in the first place.
A free 300.
Yep.
You're like, it never actually reached the account that I keep track of, so therefore it can be spent on anything.
It's a loophole. It's like it never existed.
It's just multiple gift cards.
So if like I keep a little fund in my car of cash for coffee whenever I buy coffee and stuff, and that money, it's like free coffee every day.
I wonder if other people feel like that.
A lot of people feel like that. It's been like you can't ever have a single human unique experience. Anything you felt, somebody else has experienced it and felt it. There was a whole wave on TikTok, like 2 months ago
About this?
about this. I thought I was the only person that felt this way. Actually, every single girl that I know had that conversation in their head. I don't know if it's like a guy thing too. Maybe guys feel that way, but like TikTok, one girl posted a video and it sparked a whole thing, and like millions of people are like, this is how I see cash too.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a new one to me. I have not experienced that.
I'll have to show you the trend after.
Yeah, I would be interested in hearing more about this from more people for sure.
Yeah.
That is funny. So like the way that I felt about credit cards is
Yeah.
you feel about that actual cash. Now, the difference being mine becomes a gigantic responsibility and yours is just done.
Yeah.
So I would much rather, I think, prefer your
So I think when
your angle.
we should clarify when we're talking in this episode about cash, we don't mean like cold hard cash. We mean like debit.
Your liquidity.
Yes, your not your
liquidity.
your savings account, your
Yeah.
your debit card, like, and cash, like liquid, whatever you have on hand that you could make it real cash.
Or stocks, anything that you
Yeah.
can liquidate immediately and have the return from it that day. So I'm not talking about real estate. We'll get into that in a moment. Maybe a little hint towards number 3 of ownership and things and what you can leverage in the future by buying right. So that's what's going to be number 3, and that's really what changed my life. But yeah, so when we talk about cash, it's any sort of liquidity or instant control that you can have. And then debt is anything that you have a responsibility of. So if you're measuring this out so far, you're like, okay, the first one I have control, the second one I have responsibility. So obviously you're always going to want more control than responsibility. Would you agree?
Yeah.
So I think this is where people get in trouble with jobs and like the 9 to 5 mentality of why people get frustrated is because they have more responsibility than control. They feel like they're at the mercy of everything. So if you start thinking about that with your finances, okay, I need some liquidity to balance out with my responsibility. All right, so that moves us into number 3. So what's number 3 then? So we have cash, we have debt, and number 3, which is really the big one that changed my life, is truly understanding equity.
Okay.
Equity is the third type of money.
I'm gonna have you. Anybody who's my age and watching this, not anybody, but a lot of people, have no understanding of what the word equity means, especially if you don't know real estate or you've never invested. I didn't know what equity was until like 6 months ago. So explain in the best terms.
Okay.
Equity for dummies, what is it?
Equity for this.
If you can't equity after this, I've got nothing for you.
If you can't equity after this, I've got nothing for you. This is a great time to look in the description for the link to the first 2 books. So if you need help with understanding these things, we have books in the description for you. And you can also, while you're down there, you can click the like button. Thank you. So equity, equity for dummies is what you control minus what you owe. Okay. So the value of something minus what you owe. So an easy example, I'm going to go into more personal examples here in a second, but an easy example to understand is just a piece of real estate. Let's say you buy a piece of real estate that's worth $100,000 and you pay $60,000 for it. You have $40,000 in equity.
Okay.
So equity is really the accelerant or the jet fuel to your net worth and to your potential in the future, in my personal opinion.
So what's it called if a house is worth $100,000 and you pay $110,000? You have no equity, but
That means you have negative equity.
Okay, negative equity. I didn't know if there was another word for that.
Yep. So that means you have negative equity. So another easy example to understand, one that you more commonly see in negative equity scenarios is basically any liability that you buy, you instantly have negative equity. You're creating the thing that you bought for pleasure or joy is now creating a deficit. It's now creating responsibility for you, right? What are you losing when you gain responsibility? What do you lose? You lose a little bit of control. So you get out of balance. Now, the other easy example for negative equity is in cars. So most cars, when you buy a car off the lot, say you buy a $30,000 Honda, the second you drive it off the lot, it's worth $22,000, right? Now, let's say you borrow it all $30,000, you now have negative $8,000 in equity, or you have $8,000 in negative equity. So if you were to go trade that car in the next day, you would have to put an extra $8,000 on top of your next loan for your next car, and that's where people really get in trouble. So now their net worth is actually compounding in a negative fashion as opposed to a positive compounding. So that's why understanding equity and negative equity in your example is so important, because equity becomes the jet fuel or the accelerant to your net worth and to your potential in the future, because the more things that you can buy at a discount, understanding true value of something, if you buy things at a discount, you have the ability to tap into that equity at a planned future date, whether it's through a sale or number two, which is debt. You can borrow against it because anybody, a bank, private lender, hard money lender, anything like that, can look at your asset and go, it's worth $100,000. They only owe $20,000 on it, so there's $80,000 in equity. I'll give you another $60,000 and you can use it against that, and we'll place it against that asset. So now you just created $60,000 in potential to go use on another asset, right?
This is how so many people in real estate get rich.
Yes.
You buy a house and
right.
you just hold on.
You buy a house
you
right.
buy a house right
Yep.
at a good price.
Mm-hmm.
You rent it out. You hold on to it, whatever you're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
Inevitably, in most cases, you gain equity.
Yes.
I mean, unless, everything crashes. But
You want me to go through a personal example?
yes.
Right now. We had a closing yesterday. So we purchased the property for $60,000 4 years ago.
Yes.
Now it was rented for $1,000 a month, every single month. So if you do the math on that, it grossed $48,000 on a $60,000 investment. So that's already a fantastic return. Almost unheard of results. Like that's pretty you can do that pretty commonly when you're buying correctly in specific markets. I'm not going to go super depth into that right now. If you guys have questions on that, you can put it in the comments and we'll hit them. But so bought it for 60. The house was worth, in my opinion, 130 or 140. Ended up selling at 120, which is fine. But if you bought for 60 and sold for 120, what was your equity?
$60,000.
You had $60,000 in equity.
Yeah.
So what I'm able to do is I'm able to take that 120 because I don't have any debt on the property. I'm able to take that 120 and place it into something worth $500,000 because any bank will give me 80%. So I'm able to put that 120 into $500,000 of worth into another building that makes $10,000 a month in rent. So if I'm going with the same amount of money invested, the 60 grand, okay, is now in something worth 5 times as valuable with 10 times the amount of rent. That is because of equity.
And you know what? That 120 that you spent, it's like you never even paid for. You just got a free $120,000. It probably felt like that when you got it because you bought it so long ago.
Exactly, because it's been in equity. It's been working.
That's why real estate's like the ultimate savings.
So that's why I'm able to trade that.
Yeah.
Right? I was able to what I call cycle up. So I was able to trade that in for something new that was able to provide more without me investing any more.
Yeah.
That is why equity is the accelerant or the jet fuel to your net worth and to your potential in the future. That's why right now, if you don't understand cash, debt, and equity, you might be looking at your scenario going, I got $50,000 in the bank. I've never invested anything and I'm terrified of it. Great. You're just cash heavy. That's fine. Maybe you don't have any personal debt. That's great. You don't want personal debt. If you're going to have any sort of debt, I only want you to have asset debt. I don't want you to have liability debt at any point. Like I said, as savvy and good at money as I am, I looked at credit cards as gift cards for a decade.
Yep.
So it's okay, whatever your personal financial situation is with debt. And then the third one being equity. It is incredible. If you look at the data, I've been doing some research on average net worth per age. Okay. Now the average net worth for someone between the ages of 30 to 39, it ranges from like $50,000 to $60,000 or 40 to $60,000. 80% of that is equity. So that means they bought a house and it's in their personal home. They only have $10,000 or $15,000 in liquid cash, liquid control. To me, that's out of balance. Like you have to learn how to balance these three things. That way you can actually maximize your potential. So why I said at the beginning, hey, this took me over a decade to learn. It really took me longer than that. But it took me over a decade to learn because I didn't understand that there was 3 types. I just thought of money was money, cash. Debt was my response. Like I just always had to pay it. I was always behind on it. And then
That was bad.
Yeah, just debt's bad.
Yeah.
And then I never knew what equity was.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's a lot of people watching this who go through the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So something important to know is if you want to be successful with this, you have to understand how to balance the 3. And what I mean by that, you can't be super cash heavy and be afraid to invest, afraid to have asset debt, or afraid to create equity and actually become free.
And you can't put all of your money into assets and have no liquid cash.
And just exactly. And just on the other side, what you can't do is you can't be the guy who has a huge net worth with a ton of equity and absolutely no cash and a bunch of debt.
And you definitely just can't have a bunch of debt.
And if you only have a bunch of debt, okay,
and none of the other two.
Yeah, if you're debt heavy and you don't have any equity or cash, like let's do this. Let's go through the actual steps that you should take depending on where your balance is at. That way, right now in this moment, you can measure if you're cash heavy, debt heavy, or equity heavy, and whichever one you are, if you're not in perfect balance, right? What you'll be able to do is you'll be able to take the action that we tell you, and then it will instantly improve it.
Yep.
And it'll be perfect for you. And that's what you want to be able to do, that again, to maximize your potential moving forward. That way you can make more, thrive, have the life, have time freedom that you're so desperately seeking.
So which one's the most common to be unbalanced? Which direction do you think?
In my debt.
Debt. So more debt than anything.
Debt for sure.
All right. So let's dive into that one first.
Okay. Yeah. Because we're such consume everything. Find happiness in things.
Capitalism.
Oh, don't you start.
Capitalism, consumers, America. Rah!
Have a whole capitalism talk right now.
Go ahead.
If you really, if you wanted to, we could dive into that. Technically, it should be a kingdom, but like we're never gonna have the right human leader to not take advantage of things. Sidebar. Anyways, let's do debt first. So when I most commonly see people are out of balance with too much debt, not enough control, which is cash liquidity, and then basically equity can be anywhere because they're not focused on it or don't understand that it.
Because they're chasing the debt.
They're chasing the debt. Yeah. So typically, like
you can't focus on liquidity.
Yeah. Equity is either completely wiped out from trying to solve debt with debt, which is never a good idea. So, all right. So let's say you have too much debt. If you're looking at the balance of your cash, which is your control, your debt, which is your responsibility, your equity, which is your potential, right? If you are out of balance and you have too much debt, what you should do immediately is sell.
Okay.
Now you might be going, all my debt is credit cards and I have no assets. Then you need to sell your skill set. You need to sell your time.
You need to make a skill set that you can sell to pay off the debt.
Via selling your time and learning.
Get debt on a plan.
You have to get debt onto a plan. So if you have, let's say you have credit card debt right now, right? All your credit cards are going to be 25, 30%. Like they're outrageous, right? You can turn over your credit card statement and know at the bottom of it, they have to list out how long it'll take on average. If you make the minimum payment, it's going to be between 30 and 50 years. It's disaster. You'll never get ahead of it. So you have to sell. If you have anything to sell whatsoever, typically if you have credit card debt, what do you have? You got a bunch of stuff. And it's usually laying around you. Start selling it and paying it off. Do anything that you can to pay it off, because the only solution for debt is creation of liquidity, aka cash control, and then setting it towards that debt to pay it off.
Yeah.
That's the most common one that I see. For sure. If people are going to be out of balance, they're out of balance with debt. They have too much debt.
Now, obviously, the most favorable one is probably too much cash.
Yeah, that would be the most favorable one.
Because there's so much potential, like so many places you could take that.
Yeah, I was trying to measure it against equity. Like, would I rather have more cash or equity?
I guess you would rather have more equity, but somebody who, I guess you really can't have more equity without understanding it, though.
Right. Yeah, unless you inherit something. Yeah, the chances of you having more equity than cash or debt and not understanding it is pretty low.
Okay, let me rephrase that. I think the most glittery option would be to have the most cash.
I like glittery.
From the outside, it looks like that would be the best option.
Yeah, because it gives you the most control and the most ability to try something new.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I would even agree with that over equity, for the simple fact that if you have more equity, it's not liquid, so it's not necessarily an asset. Right.
Yeah.
It still might be taking money from you. Like if it's your own personal home, you might have a lot of equity, but you still got to pay for it every month.
Right.
Right. So I would rather, if I was going to be heavy on something, I would prefer to be heavy on the cash control side, because then I can immediately put it into something that can work for me.
Yeah. And the opportunities are endless there, where equity, it takes more to make a decision on equity, I feel like.
Yeah. And it takes longer.
Yeah. Longer, more knowledge, more practice, more understanding.
Yeah. Because you have to access it some way, somehow.
Yeah.
You're going to have to sell something, leverage something. You're going to have to take some sort of action to have a desired result from it. So on the cash side, let's say you're super cash heavy. And by super cash heavy, I mean you have no assets, you don't really have any personal debt, but maybe you got 40 or 50 grand saved up.
Yeah.
Or maybe you got 100 grand or something like that. And you're going, okay, I don't know what to do with it, right? So that's not any really better of a position than being heavy somewhere else, for the simple fact that you're not going to be able to escape what you're looking to escape without putting it to use, because money is useless unless you actually use it.
If you're in that position and you are super cash heavy, go back and watch the episode we have on scams, because that's how you get yourself, I feel like, into the position where you're vulnerable to be scammed, because the first thing people think is, how do I, like, they have FOMO and they're like, where do I put this money?
Yeah.
So if you are in that position and you are very cash heavy, watch that video, then come back and proceed.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just look for the episode where I'm a green Grinch on the thumbnail.
There you go.
Yeah, so if you're super cash heavy, what do you want to do? What you want to do is you want to create equity somewhere. And what that means is you want to have control or ownership in some sort of asset or something that matters to you that has the ability to work for you. That's what matters. So to me, I don't care if that's index funds. I don't care if that's real estate. I don't care if that's a business that you believe in. I don't care what it is, actually. But if you need to put a portion of that towards something that you can own because it fights against inflation, it has the ability to go to work, and it protects you in the long run.
Yeah.
And you're gaining a skill set of investing and being able to learn compounding over time. So if you get started now, even if you start small, let's say you got 50 grand saved up, put 5 grand into something, put 10 grand into something, and then learn what it's like to have money leave you and wait for it to come back to you in a larger amount. That's how you're going to learn.
Because it's great. It's so great to have 50 grand at your palms and to be able to have it to do anything with. But the problem is that it's useless unless you use it. We say this all the time. The money, the cash is useless unless you're using it.
Yeah, unless you're putting it towards something.
Yeah. So even if it's like you said, 5 grand, start somewhere, but use the money, because it just sitting in your account isn't doing anything for you.
Yeah. So if you have your immediate needs taken care of, if you have a reserve fund, some people call it an emergency fund, a rainy day fund, whatever it may be. Okay. Find that number in which you sleep well. Let's say it's 10 grand. Invest up and above that 10 grand. If it's 20 grand, invest up and above the 20 grand. So if you're cash heavy, be focused on creating equity somewhere that goes to work for you. That's the action step to take if you're out of balance there. Now, the third one would be if you're out of balance and you are equity heavy. So what do you think you do if you're equity heavy? If you were equity heavy, and maybe we'll go through your balance after this. That would be fun. That would be fun live for me and not you.
Okay.
So if you're equity heavy, you need to look at that. If you're equity heavy, you're typically either low on debt or you're low on cash, one of the two, and or both.
I think if you're equity heavy, wouldn't the solution be to sell something?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
If you're equity heavy, because if it's actually working for you, it depends on what the equity's in. But if it's working for you,
you'd be getting cash.
Or protecting the capital for you, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to maximize it, that's when you'd have an opportunity of leveraging it. So by creating a little bit of debt responsibly into another asset to have that pay itself down.
Okay. So pull the equity. Are you saying like pull the equity out and put it towards something else?
Yeah. So the example that I used a few moments ago, I chose to sell instead of borrow against. But a little different. Like that's about learning about yourself and figuring out, we've owned our portfolio for,
quite some time.
Yeah. Like it's obviously growing. And so we knew where we were looking to go with that portion of the portfolio into something else. So that's why we made that decision.
You made a decision to turn the wheel and make it change the direction. That's different.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So you're saying take the equity out of one of or however many of the things, put it toward something else, like a debt, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. So
that will bring you more cash so that they're even.
Bingo.
Okay.
So let's say let's just use a simple example. Let's say you're super equity heavy. You have your own house. Let's take your house out of the equation because I don't love using your own home on things.
No.
I'd rather that be your home, that you put your family roots in the ground. Let's say you got a single rental or index funds or something. Let's just use a rental as an example here. Let's say you have $100,000 in equity in it. And you're like, I really want and it's been good to you, and you're like, I really want a second or a third one, but you're having trouble building up cash fast enough to go get the next one, and the market's kind of running away from you. What you can do is you can leverage that $100,000 of equity, and you can go get 60 to 80,000 from a bank and put that into the next one, and now you'll have two. Obviously, you'll have debt on this first one, and the debt needs to be able to be paid by that asset first, but you're able to conserve your capital that way. So that way you can be more balanced and you're not leaving a bunch of money on the table over time. And then you can focus on paying that back down just like you did on the first one. Again, you have to know things about yourself though. If you're somebody that struggles with debt, being a little equity heavy is better than being debt balanced.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with that. So if you sleep better at night like that, stick with that strategy and just wait to get your next one. It's okay.
Yeah. It's all about what works for every person. That's why you always say, like, though you think real estate is the best way to invest, it's not for everybody. So,
right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to learn about yourself first. So yeah, let's just recap it really quick. If you're cash heavy, make sure to turn some of it into equity in an asset. If you're debt heavy, sell. Whatever you can sell, whether it's your time or assets or liabilities to create capital to pay off the debt, you need to sell. And if you're equity heavy, you need to look at possibly raising some debt, using some of that equity and putting it to an even better use and cycling up.
Yep, I would agree. Anything else you want to go over?
You want to do your balance?
I mean, we can.
What's your balance look like? Let me guess.
Okay.
I would say you're pretty balanced, actually.
I feel like I am.
Yeah. My guess is that you're pretty balanced. You got a good amount of cash. Mm-hmm. You have cash invested in equity, so you have ownership in multiple things. You have ownership in real estate. You have ownership in your insurance. You have ownership in a few different things. Your car.
No, that's not.
Your car. And then your debt's all on a plan, and it's all low interest.
Yeah, and I don't have any bad debt. I mean, I use credit cards to pay them off every month, though. There's no debt where
yeah,
it's
you
anything
use
that's not an asset.
You go arbitrage and you travel for free and things like that off points. Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say that I'm pretty even. I feel confident in my balance there.
Yeah. What were you before you bought your house?
Before I bought my house, I would have been cash heavy.
I think you would have been cash heavy. I
was really cash heavy on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like preferably like you want to be cash heavy.
So much that I was like, Todd, what do I do with this money? And you're like, I think it might be time to buy a house.
Yeah. So like now you have equity in your house. Now you put a healthy amount into it, and now it's worth. I mean, you have an easy, in my opinion, 30% equity for what you've done.
I think even after buying the house, I was still cash heavy.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
After opening the whole life policy, I think that kind of balanced the scales there.
Yeah, you started balancing, which is funny because you instantly have access to that. So I mean, it's still liquid.
Yeah, it is.
But you have, and yeah, in my opinion, you've done a very, very good job of having, hey, I'm going to keep, $100K here. I'm going to have a balanced debt here. That's all on a plan that takes very little from me. And it's like 10% of my monthly earnings, if that. Is it even 10%?
Which one?
Your debt. Your monthly debt? It's not even 10% of your earnings, is it?
Depends on the month.
It's low.
It depends. Yeah, it's low. It's below 20 for sure.
Yeah, it's really low.
Yeah.
That's everything. That's not just like just the house and then stuff on top of it. That's everything. And then you have at least 30% equity in, the ownership of your real estate. Like that's nice and balanced, and you're going to have a lot of options coming up. That's like what I want to see from people. Yeah. Typically when I'm working through finances with people.
So if you have something and you want to run through it in the comments, let us know what you think.
Yeah, and let us know if you're debt heavy, equity heavy, or cash heavy. And no matter which one you are, now you have the steps to take to be able to instantly change what that outlook looks like, and you can sleep better at night.
This is the year of action. 2024, year of action.
If you're watching this in 2025, it's the year of action.
It's still the year of action.
In 2026, it's
the year of action. Take action.
Yeah. But guys, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you got any value out of this, make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll be back with you next week.
Yay.
The hands.